Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for coming today. Sorry, I'm just making sure that everybody is able to hear me. Wonderful. Welcome to our last technical assistance chat of the year. I'm so glad that you guys were able to join us, and I hope you were able to come to some of the other ones throughout the year. All of our chats are recorded and then posted to our YouTube channel and our website. So if you did miss any, please feel free to go back and watch them. The chat today is on the continuum of Tier 3 supports. And you are getting a special treat today. You're getting a presentation from Dr. Brian Gaunt and Jason Lobley from our project. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to them so they have lots of time to tell us about Tier 3.
Okay, great. Thank you, Betsy, and good morning, everyone. Before we begin, just want to give a big shout out to Jason Lobley and Brooke McDermott for their help in putting this presentation together. And also, if you wouldn't mind, please, in your chat box, let's wish Betsy Lazega a happy birthday. Today's her 25th birthday.
Wow.
Happy birthday, Betsy.
Thanks.
Yeah, happy birthday, Betsy, and thank you for everything that you've been doing for us as well. And thank you all for being here. Thank you all for all that you do for schools and for students. We know that what you do is really important. And so we also know that your schedules are very busy. And so we're really glad that you're able to make this time to be here with us. And again, we are recording this. So if there are friends or colleagues of yours that you think would be interested in this topic, but who could not be here today, please feel free to share that video link when it's available. And as you know, all of our TA chats are recorded as well as stored in our live binder for folks to access at a later time. So yeah, today we're going to talk about a continuum of Tier 3 supports. And so we want to start with just a quick disclaimer that I think is really important, just so that we're all starting off on the same page about kind of the purpose or the role of Tier 3. We want to emphasize that Tier 3, obviously isn't a standalone tier. It's a connection with this multi-tiered approach that we have in our schools. What we're going to be talking about today is specifically how Tier 3 itself can exist as a continuum. So we're going to be getting into that today. But just so that you know, the content does not cover guiding eligibility decision-making for ESE services. There's tons of resources already out there in the field, particularly through the Bureau of Exceptional Education and Student Services, around the requirements and the procedures for determining eligibility. Now, it's often thought that, yes, students who are eligible for special ed services may in fact need services at a Tier 3 level, but it's important for us to recognize that a student, of course, does not have to be identified as being in exceptional student education in order to receive Tier 3. So again, it's just very important distinctions for us to make, because it's all about supporting kids based on their need, not on their labels. And so just again, want to make sure that we have that understanding going up front. So our session objectives, as I've already alluded, we're going to get into this concept of what a comprehensive Tier 3 system is, and in that describe what the different levels of intensity might be, even within just Tier 3. So there's a continuum, of course, across Tiers 1, 2, and 3. We're going to highlight that relationship and talk about the importance of establishing a really good foundation at Tiers 1 and 2 to support the effectiveness of your Tier 3 systems. But then we're going to go into a deeper dive into really kind of characterizing the elements of what we mean by a comprehensive or continuum of Tier 3 services. And so we'll start out by taking sort of a helicopter view, if you will, over this concept of a Tier 3 system by first highlighting that, Tier 3 is a shared responsibility across district, school level leaders, as well as the team level, who will work directly in developing interventions and supports at a Tier 3 level for students. This blueprint that we have on our website, you've got a link there available at the bottom, really kind of sets the stage for a structure for us to talk about a results-driven Tier 3 system. Highlighting that, again, there are different responsibilities that are shared between the district level and the school level practices. And very specifically, what we're saying there is that the district has a lot of responsibility in terms of really setting the context, setting the conditions at school levels so that the evidence-based practices that we're going to talk to you about, which represent tier 3 services, in particular, engaging in a functional behavioral assessment and behavior support plan approach, you know, it's really important that they're monitoring how well those practices are happening at schools, and where those practices are not sufficiently happening, then providing, ongoing coaching, professional development, consultation to schools from that central office level. Policies and procedures clearly also have a role to play, because that's going to have an impact on how administrators are making decisions and how we as a team at the tier 3 level are making decisions as far as what students should access, when to access. And so the alignment of those policies and procedures and the related infrastructure supports, particularly infrastructure related to your data systems, is really crucial to set that stage for effective database decision-making practices at the school level. Now, one of the things that we could certainly get into and talk more about is some of those specific characteristics that go into each of the district and the school levels. And so for the interest of time, we do have these handouts that we recommend that you access, download, and please feel free to share those with all of the stakeholders that you work with. We do believe that as the blueprint guides us around a tier 3 system, that's important is to make sure that everybody in our school systems has a very clear understanding of what the role is of tier 3, what tier 3 represents, and how it should operate, so that when we have that common language understanding, we're able to work together to ensure that that way of work is in fact happening, and when it's not, collaborate to troubleshoot, the barriers that are affecting us from being able to engage in these evidence-based practices with consistency over time. Now, a big part of understanding this relationship or shared responsibility across district levels and school levels is, again, for us to highlight that different decisions are being made at different levels with respect to operating your tier 3 system. So when we talk about a district's level kind of role, or what they're governing, it's what kind of guidance is available to schools and to tier 3 teams around developing your multidisciplinary teams. What kind of guidance is provided around the members who should serve on that team? What types and amounts of professional development are available to schools and school personnel? And how do we make sure that those professional development resources are need driven, right? That in the context of trying to engage in these evidence-based practices at the tier 3 team level or the overall school level as part of their MTSS, making sure that we're identifying sources of implementation data to help drive and decide then, okay, what are the professional development supports that would be needed to kind of cover the gaps in any infrastructures or practices that might be missing. So that, of course, includes coaching, making sure that we recognize that training and that more didactic approach to providing professional development certainly is one way to get new practices started, new knowledge understood. The application and the fluency of those practices and knowledge, of course, requires then the extension of coaching and making sure that coaching itself is also needs driven, right? So the idea there that we can differentiate our coaching supports based on levels of need. Again, I mentioned about the data systems and the importance of not only our data systems for really pinpointing and understanding why the concerns that we're having for a student are happening, so that we can build a plan that directly is focused on and linked to the specific reasons why that behavior is happening. But it's also the data system becomes important for us to then evaluate the overall effectiveness of our tier 3 system, right? So of all the students that are going to receive tier 3 services for any type of content area, how do we know if tier 3 is effective? What % of those kids are showing progress towards their goals? I mentioned policy alignment, and of course, then the collaboration with stakeholders at the district level. Now, as you can see, as we move down to the school level, again, there's that understanding that you're going to have different teams operating at different levels of this tiered system. So you'll have your school-based leadership team, you have perhaps some sort of grade level team or PLC type team structure operating, again, sort of 1 foot in tier 1, 1 foot perhaps in tier 2. And then you might have either a single team that operates both advanced tiers, or you might have a separate tier 2 team, a separate tier 3 team. But these different teams obviously are sharing the responsibility and distributing the roles around all three of the tiers. And so when it gets to specifically the ability to provide a continuum of supports at tier three, we do want to talk a little bit more about, sort of the options or differentiated approaches that you might take with developing your team for tier three, and under what conditions might you be thinking about pulling in additional members for supports on particular cases. So we're going to highlight there in the next section. We also emphasize at the school level too, the responsibility for, again, providing training and coaching to staff as needed. So as many of you know who've been through our PBIS trainings on tier one, the approach that we take is to establish some level of fluency and understanding and skills such that the persons on that school-based leadership team can further enhance and provide more of that day-to-day ongoing coaching supports as they're rolling out and implementing not only tier one, but then of course the advanced tiers themselves. They clearly have a role to also play in the evaluation of the success of tier three and the other tiers, as well as guidelines around collaborating with our stakeholders, students and parents included. Now, as we get into that tier three team itself, focusing on an individual student and working together collaboratively to help support a student to be more successful, that's when we start to now get into database decision-making practices. That's when we have to really talk about then how that team is set up to effectively engage in appropriate assessment techniques and how to use the results from those assessment features to really understand the why behind the student's concerns, to really pinpoint that function of behavior and get a really clear understanding about what are the conditions in which this behavior occurs or these behaviors occur. And that, of course, then fuels that behavior intervention planning. From there, then it's a matter of who on the team will do what in regards to implementing that plan and what training or coaching might they need before we actually then start providing that to the student. And along the way, evaluating the impacts of our plan, and where we don't see sufficient progress, how do we make adjustments and modifications to our plan to get more power? So again, just giving you that little bit of an overview of this shared responsibility between district, school, and students. And in turn, since a big part of our topic for today includes the concept of database decision making, is to also think about database decision making from an implementation standpoint. So if you're not seeing evidence of the practices that we're going to be talking about happening in your schools around tier three, then a slide or an information or the handouts that we showed you on the previous slide can help serve as developing some possible hypotheses or reasons as to why those practices are not happening at the school for tier three. Are there certain infrastructures missing? Do we not have the right people at the table? Do we not have sufficient expertise around how to engage in an FBA BIP process? Or are there limitations with what our data systems can do and what they can support? And does that then mean we have to find workarounds for that as well? And so again, just giving you the overall context of the kind of the organizational comprehensive system view of this tier three. Now, drilling into the relationship between tiers one, two, and three, again, is also really important to emphasize up front before we get into the more specific details about tier three. So we'll be showing you towards the end of this presentation some upcoming resources and tools that we're working on. We're also going to be showing you some information about some advances that we're making in producing and providing school level training on tier three as an extension of a tier two system. And so that means then that, trying to work on tier three when you've got a shaky tier one, tier two system in place can be very problematic and complex, let alone messy. And so it's really important to emphasize that the effectiveness and the efficiency with which your tier three system can operate really does depend on how well you've successfully set up that foundation of a school-wide system to support students at tier one, and how PBIS is operating at the classroom level, so that combined between the school-wide aspects, classrooms and non-classrooms, plus the more specific practices of the classroom, really set the stage then for ensuring that the majority of students, the vast majority, really don't end up needing additional services. So again, it's just a reminder to us, those of us who are tracking and understanding what MTSS is or what a tiered system is all about, Again, remember that the tiered system triangle represents what we have to offer. It's not the students themselves. And so what are we doing to prevent behavior concerns on our campus at tier one? And are we successful at preventing the majority of students from having those concerns? And of those that do, then what are we doing at tier two to help provide some supports for them to be more successful at tier one? And are those students demonstrating success towards our tier one goals as a result of receiving tier two interventions? What I'm trying to say there more explicitly is that much like tier three and making sure that we understand that it needs to be effective for the majority of students who receive that level of service, tier two is very similar. We want to make sure that tier two is not a flow through so that every kid that gets to tier two ends up at tier three. If that's the case, we need to take a closer look at tier two and why it's not effective enough. So this PowerPoint or this presentation, of course, is going to be covering tier three, but along the way, we're going to be highlighting resources that you might want to consider reviewing, or if you have already, just re-reviewing related to either PBIS in the classroom. You can see there on that bottom green box there, Classroom Essentials. So we have a number of resources on our website that can guide you more deeply into what those 5 elements and features are about at the classroom level. But also then too, we'll be sharing with you some connections with how tier 2 and tier 3 can operate together in a seamless way. All right, so now we can just kind of start taking a closer look here at this tier 3 continuum idea. You'll see there at the bottom that there are some research studies that have shown us that when we're talking about specifically students who engage in persistent, non-dangerous, non-safety related challenging behaviors, right? The kinds of things where you can think about some kind of disruption, disrespect, work avoidance, refusals. We can help support them, and those students can benefit from our services by taking a more brief or streamlined approach to this FBA BIP process. As we get more complex in the student's case or profile of needs, and or as the intensity and the concerns are become perhaps resistant some earlier intervention options that we try, then we can start thinking about then what are those kind of extra layers of wraparound supports that we might bring in, which might also include additional persons to add to your team. So we're going to be unpacking this for you and what these 3 different levels sort of look like and feel like and can sound like. And then we want to engage you in also a little bit of a chat and conversation along the way about how this is resonating with you and to what degree this continuum approach of a tier 3 system is happening in your schools currently right now. So let's go ahead now and start talking about then the team membership and how the team might look, who it might be on that team, and how this team might evolve or change based on which level of this tier 3 continuum you might be operating with on a given case. So some essential school leadership team or systems level team responsibilities, of course, to set out with, again, recognizing that tier 3 team is going to be responsible for all of the functional behavioral assessment, which is basically problem identification, analysis of the why, and then getting into developing that plan, considering the readiness to implement that plan. And then, of course, once we implement, tracking the progress and the fidelity of our plan so that we can make adjustments and modifications as needed until that plan is successful at reaching the goals. That way of work, of course, rests on the possibility that we have the infrastructures to support that way of work. And so that's where we, again, go back to the importance of the school-based leadership team's responsibilities. So there are times when we might need to access rare or different resources that we already have in-house, because after we've analyzed a student's case, we've recognized that there's a need there that perhaps we don't have available to support them with in our existing resources. And so it's really important that administrators are fully aware and kept in the loop. Even better yet, administrators are represented as part of your membership so that those decisions can be made in a timely manner. Communications can be really, really important at tier 3. And so those communication protocols don't need to be built out of thin air or scratch for tier 3, but rather should be a continuum of the other communication resources that are already in place to provide supports to all three tiers. So how are we engaging our staff, our families? How do we engage and promote student voice? And how can we structure ourselves so that our team meetings are highly efficient and highly productive? So it's outside the scope of this presentation, but it's worth saying though that we treat the team as sort of step zero to a multi-step database decision-making process. How well that team functions, how well they collaborate, how efficiently they work through the decisions that they need to make in a structured way is really vital to helping students to come in contact with the intervention supports that they need in a timely way. And you can see on the bottom left of that that side of the screen that we do have there a sample agenda around tier 2 and tier 3, which I'll highlight here in a moment. Content knowledge expertise is also going to have a little bit more of an intense flavor at tier 3. So we know that content knowledge is necessary across all three tiers. In particular, as we're addressing behavior challenges in schools, we really need to make sure that we've got people on the team who have a deep understanding of not only a functional based approach to analyzing behavior patterns in schools, but that they also understand the reciprocal relationship between a student's engagement performances as measured by behavior sources of data, as well as their academic performance and progress in their classrooms instructionally. And when we talk about behavior, it's important for us to recognize that we're not talking about just externalizing actions of behavior. We're also referring to students with internalizing concerns, mental health, wellness, and similar types of internalizing behavior concerns. And so as we think about then moving forward and talking more deeply about FBA and BIP, it's recognizing that, this process at tier 3 that we'll be talking about can be used for students who are having intense medical, mental health, or other kinds of wellness concerns as well. You might also consider too on your team, people who have advanced skills at facilitating the FBA BIP. This process of the FBA BIP is a problem-solving model. There are other models out there which we'll highlight. The FBA BIP model in particular provides a greater level of scaffolding, structure, and intensity to the analysis of why a student's behavior concerns are happening. And so that tier 3, there's a shift at taking that kind of more deeper, intensive look at how we analyze student behaviors. And so as we think about the people who have that knowledge to engage in that process with fidelity, we also might want to think about other content experts who can bring to the table what we would refer to as evidence-based hypotheses that might explain why a student is behaving in the way they are. And so they might be counselors, they might be behavior analysts, they might be school psychologists, social workers, people for whom you think that because of the nature and the characteristics of that student's case, we might want to have certain people at the table who can lend their hand and their voice to helping us to pinpoint why this might be happening. And of course, we have to make sure that when we're developing plans for students, that we're not forgetting the legal and ethical guidelines that the state of Florida promotes, and that also exist at the national level, right? Thinking about relationship-based approaches to discipline, ensuring that we are approaching the supports for student in sort of that, how do we prevent future occurrences? What are we going to do to teach the replacement behaviors that we would like to see? And then what are we going to do in terms of providing feedback to the student around the demonstration of the behaviors we want to see, as well as praise them for when they're not engaging in the behaviors that we're trying to minimize. And as you can imagine, talking about database decision-making, we've got to have folks at the table who have strong expertise and knowledge around how to use, interpret, and make use of different forms and types of assessment or data in terms of where they're used in this process of the FBA BIP. And so just another way to kind of map out the responsibilities of this tier 3 team. We've talked about, the importance of having the right people at the table, what that membership is all about, who's reflected, and what kinds of content expertise is available. And then highlighting that then that team works collaboratively to engage in a very in-depth structured assessment process, in particular aimed at trying to identify the specific function or functions that might explain why a student is behaving the way they are. That assessment and the results obtained, of course, then lead us to develop an intervention plan that's directly linked to those results. And so that way we're not just kind of, making stuff up or just running with assumptions and developing a plan based off of purely unrealistic assumptions. We're really using those assessment results in a targeted way to provide more precision into what we're going to do for a student in their intervention plan. And something that's really important for us to also to recognize too is that even when that behavior support plan is written, it doesn't necessarily mean that we're ready to implement it tomorrow. We have to consider the division of labor around who's going to do what, when, where, and why around the pieces of our plan. What actions are different members going to engage in and do? And in particular, who are the personnel on the team that are going to be providing the intervention or interventions to the student in a direct way? And are those persons appropriately trained, ready, or do they require further coaching and readiness to be able to provide them that service? So that's where we can just take a moment to make sure that the members who we flag and identify as the interventionist is not only bought in and committed to the decisions and the solutions that we've decided to use, but that they have the skills and the knowledge of how to engage in those practices. Because if not, we know that there's going to likely be a problem with the fidelity of using our plan in the future. So we get out ahead of that by making sure that everybody on the team feels capable and ready to engage in their part to the plan. And if not, we'll take a moment to provide some training, provide some coaching until they are ready. And then now we can begin to roll that out to support the student directly. As that plan's in place, we're collecting and evaluating relevant data to make decisions regarding that student's success and making decisions around whether or not we're seeing enough success, enough progress towards reaching the goal in time, and if not, how to make modifications to the plan so that we can get more power out of it. So this slide here is just providing you with an additional set of those team responsibilities, some of which I've already covered. There are a couple of other sort of observations here to make. The one being that, in some cases, you have students who are being nominated for Tier 3 services who have already been receiving or currently receiving Tier 2 services. And so again, there's some coordination that really needs to take place in terms of what did we learn from those past efforts to support the student at Tier 2? And what do we want to replicate and maintain as we advance this into Tier 3? Is it going to be a decision where we're going to intensify what they're already getting at Tier 2 by just providing more dosage, more frequency, and more intensity of that same plan? Or are we going to do something completely different and customized now because what we did at Tier 2 really didn't have an impact at all? So those are conversations too that we kind of have to wrestle with as we begin to enter into then this practice of database decision-making around Tier 3 services. Keep in mind too that as we develop goals and we work through an understanding of what it is we want the student to be able to demonstrate and do, what those replacement behaviors might be, there's going to be in the concept or in the context of the FBA portion of this work, an opportunity to explore why a student's operating the way they are. So we'll talk about a little bit more in a few moments about kind of the role that the analysis plays. What are we analyzing? The short version for right now is when students are not performing well at Tier 1, which is why we identify them in the first place, then, okay, what are the barriers for them not performing the way we'd like them to at Tier 1? Is it a lack of social skills? Is it a lack of understanding around our school expectations, rules, and procedures? Is it that there are certain wellness or mental health conditions that are not being appropriately managed? What are the barriers that might explain why a student's not successful at Tier 1? Once we identify those barriers, then the plan becomes all about reducing those barriers. So if they don't have social skills, the plan is to improve those social skills, but ultimately the goal is, are they more successful at Tier 1? The other element too, I've already highlighted, but I want to emphasize again that as we approach Tier 3 and the team division of responsibilities, the communication with our caregivers, our families, and even the students themselves becomes even more intense. And we have to, of course, make sure that we've already have a solid foundation for how we're operating in keeping our families up to date, inviting them to participate in our conversations and our decisions, and maintaining those strong, positive, collaborative relationships with them as advocates of the students that they represent, their own children. And in certain cases, finding those opportunities to include student voice in the design of why and what we're going to do to help support them to be more successful. Now, so as I mentioned, there's this resource that's available to you in the link provided in the previous slide. And if you were to go to that link, I said, it's going to provide you a template that you're welcome to take and run with as is. You can modify it if you'd like to fit, sort of the customizations that are preferable to you. But we know that when a team has a really strong, clear structure for how to operate and how to design their agendas from meeting to meeting as they go through this process, really helps to establish that efficiency and productivity of the teamwork. And at this moment right now, what we'd like to do is to invite you to share this in the chat, or perhaps open your microphone if you'd like. What right now are your schools receiving in terms of guidance around how to engage in this continuum of tier 3 support? So I'm just curious to see and check in with you about what's resonating so far and what we've covered around just sort of the outline of this tier 3 continuum approach, and if this approach is currently being used in your schools. So if you would please just share with us a little bit about your thoughts and perspectives of what's currently happening in the field. All right, David, thank you. I see, yeah, lots to learn. Yes, and thank you for saying that. It is worth it. Tier 3 can be very complex, overwhelming to certain people who are new to this topic, but it is definitely worth it, and it may take some time to fully wrap your head around all the pieces, but once you do, there is an aha. So thank you, David. Others, please share with us what right now is some of the guidance that your schools are receiving around the design of your Tier 3 system. All
So,
right, thank you. Hi, Ashley.
oh, hey, sorry, I didn't know if I was talking over anyone. Hi, Brian. So I'm at KIT Miami. I was talking earlier in the chat, and I said that our school actually divides the academic and behavior. And so I think that there are like strong protocols in place where we have trained like GLCs. And initially, when we went into it, it's the same process, just like your intervention menu is different. So me being the person who primarily at the district level deals with behavior, along with our director of ESC who primarily deals with academics. We created these like intervention menus that they can pick and choose from as they're writing their tier 2 plans. However, somewhere along the way, it kind of just like focused on academics and not so much as behaviors.
Yeah.
So like it's a strong plan. I think that they know what to do. It's a matter of like whose responsibility it is.
Yeah.
And I guess like everybody feeling very overwhelmed. So usually it results in me just repeatedly saying like, I need a tier 2 plan for this child. And so I'll do that like in meetings with like school leaders and principals until it eventually gets done.
Yeah, no, I think it's great that you all are providing some of that support to schools and lending a hand and, advocating or communicating options that are available to them in terms of what intervention options might be available in the district. Obviously, I think that certainly sets the stage for some efficient decision making. We have those maps in front of us or those lists in front of us as we're making decisions about what to provide a student. And so it saves us some time without having to go about figuring out what we have available to us or only choosing what we think we know. And so I think obviously that's a great place to start. I want to validate what you said though about, the complexity of coordination, communication, and then the tendency for certain balls to be dropped when we have a separate team for academics across the advanced tiers or a separate team for behavior across those same tiers. Clearly there's a relationship. A lot of the students who have a need for academic interventions at tiers 2 and 3 are likely in some cases demonstrating some types of internalizing or externalizing concerns as it relates to their academic failures in the past. And on the reverse, we have a lot of students who oftentimes are engaging in their challenging behaviors as a way of escaping some of the academic demands for which they're not feeling successful or they feel ready or bought in to engage in. So, it does add, I think, a little extra layer of complexity when schools have separate teams for academic versus behavior, because in some cases, both teams might be working with the same student. And how do we make sure that the services that we come up with on each of those teams coordinates in a seamless way from the student's perspective? So yeah, I think that that's certainly something, for us to consider as we think about how to design our teams and how to make sure that we're able to support the coordination of services across those teams. I think really is the big piece there. Have you all thought about maybe what your next steps are in terms of how to help the work of those different teams kind of come together or to help inform each other's work? When there's a
Not at the moment. I think that I'm waiting for some decisions to come down around like rewriting job rules or job responsibilities. And once I have that information, I think that I'll be able to um, make some decisions at my level around like which people have the capacity to be on the team.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a
But thank
great.
you for that. I appreciate it.
You're very welcome. Very, very welcome. Let's see, going back to the chat here. Thank you, David, again. Yeah, definitely worth it for the kids. Share this info and recorded TA chat with our district folks. Absolutely. Please link everybody to everything that we provide. It's all free and available to the public. So by all means, let us know if there are additional resources that you're on the lookout for that you think your people might be interested in. We're happy to connect you to that. Let's see here. And so, David, you also another question, how to phrase this question. Let's see here. Any differentiation for Tier 2 and Tier 3 MTSS for behavior supports for ESC and especially ELL students? Could look different in different districts. Yeah, I think you're onto something here. I mean, that's generally the theme of what we want to have value for, is that as we get into tiers 2 and 3, it really is about differentiating. It really is about how well what we've provided our students is uniquely matched to their profile of need and characteristics. So if, for example, we're working with a student who's going to access tier 2 interventions, behavior or academics, and we've pinpointed that, okay, this is a student who's, lacking certain prerequisite foundational skills that might help to explain why they're not working at grade level on that content area, then okay, part of our intervention is going to be focusing on then developing and providing those skills. And let's say we have an evidence-based program or intervention package that's already available. It's been shown to work to address that concern, but the student we're working with has a limited English proficiency, or is a student for whom has other type of disability, maybe a cognitive disability. And so the question then becomes, how do we take this evidence-based treatment that we know works for generally this type of problem with most kids? How do we customize it so that we can now apply it for use with students who have a particular disability characteristic or who have English language proficiency? Now, the decisions to make that are really tough to do in a protocol, one-size-fits-all way. But it is important to recognize that when this FBA portion of this database decision-making process is done really, really well and with strong fidelity, that's where those questions can be entertained. We get to the point we say, okay, we understand now the function of the student's behavior. We see a sense of, what they might need. It's generating some thoughts for us in terms of what are some of those broad solution ideas or strategies that we might want to employ. And then as we get ready to go into the design of those interventions and the procedures to implement it, what are the customizations we want to make to help these students based on their unique characteristics? So thank you so much for that question. That's a really big one, a very important one. Jason or Betsy, any other chats that you see in here? I see, yeah, Mason. At our school, we have about 80% ESE, 180-ish students. We have an ESE coach, as well as case managers for each student. Behavior interventionist, you writes the plans for the team. And then if time for tier 3, coach manager invited to collaborate. That's really nice. Thank you for sharing that, Mason. Just so you know, yeah, if you're working with, a school that has a very high percentage of students with ESE services, clearly that's going to have some influence on how your tiered system is developed. Your tier 1 may already have a very different feel than other schools in terms of what they're engineering for their specific population of students. But I love how you've got this collaboration amongst different people and you're all sharing the responsibilities to help support the work and planning at tiers 2 and 3. So thank you so much for that. And I love that everybody's involved in both the academic and behavior side.
And I also saw an interesting point that Anna made about her schools have been asked to create teams, provide evidence-based resources, have been purchased, and behavior interventionists at the schools, I assume, have been trained in the FBA BIP process. So there's some systems being set up at the, I guess at the district and the school level to be able to make sure that there's there's the resources there, both in personnel and training that's involved to provide those advanced tiers of support, whether it be a tier 2 or tier 3. So I thought that was a pretty good answer to the chat question there too. They're really thinking about that infrastructure, both in personnel and resources available.
Yeah, that's a great positive example. So thank you so much, folks, for sharing all of that. So as we kind of close out this idea of the team approach to tier 3, this screenshot here, which is available in our blueprint, just again, just kind of highlights that as you think about the different levels of tier 3, and in this version, we're calling them levels 1, level 2, level 3, or you might think of that as brief, comprehensive, or wraparound. The team itself can evolve across those team levels. So, on a basic level, we might have those who have direct contact with the student, who are operating and working with the student on a day-to-day basis, and maybe some individual or two that has some content expertise to help support the problem solving and decision making. Of course, family involvement is key from the beginning. As we go up into the higher level of intensity at tier 3, though, you can see how the team size and numbers of people involved can expand. And as we approach that wraparound level, we might be thinking about also including outside agency representatives who might be called upon, or who you have existing contracts to help support students with certain needs for which the school cannot provide directly themselves, right? Whether that might be psychological services, counseling services, or other types of supports. And so before we even get into database decision-making and problem solving, we have to think about identifying students. How do we identify students to access tier 3? And so one of the methods that we build upon is to, take into consideration that schools in Florida are required to have established an early warning system. And so you see here on the screen is an example of the high school version of an early warning system for schools in Pasco County. And you can see how, they're monitoring different types of indicators, as we call them. So course performances, GPA, et cetera. And to the far right, you can see office discipline referrals. And in this early warning system approach, we established the criteria of performance that would label a student as being on track, at risk for falling off track, or otherwise off track in their performance. And so looking at that far right column, you can see how Pasco County has defined that, not only per quarter, but for the full year cumulatively. So when it comes to office discipline referrals, they're looking for students per quarter to have 0 referrals, but no more than 2 for the whole year. And so as they think about then, okay, students who are at risk, if they have 1 ODR in a quarter, that doesn't necessarily mean we might go directly to a tier 2 intervention, but it does mean let's just check to make sure. Is this a student for whom we want to recommend for interventions? Some of that influence around the decision to do that might entail looking at these other indicators. Yes, they're at risk or off track for behavior. What other indicators are there in the yellow and the red for? That might help to give us a little sense of, is this a kid for whom it's a pretty, basic, straightforward, simple case or simpler case for which we think tier 2 might be appropriate? Or is this kid showing us a pattern of needs across different areas, including behavior, that appear to be interrelated or complex enough, and maybe the intensity of the behavior concerns is intense enough that we go straight to tier 3. Now, in general, rule of thumb is, if when in doubt, start at tier 2, do the best work at tier 2, make sure you're monitoring progress on how that student responds, and based on how they respond to tier 2, you may then make decisions to intensify. And so again, it's not up to us to tell you what your decision rules have to be, but we do want to make sure, though, that your schools and your district are working together and collaborating on designing those decision rules, because it's really important to make sure that we're really strategic and careful about putting too many kids into our intervention spaces. So, how do we make sure, of course, that tier 1's healthy, and where it's not, let's make sure we put a priority on getting more power out of tier 1. And then of the kids who are demonstrating a need, which level of intensity might we start to work with them in, and how do we make sure we don't overwhelm those intervention spaces? So this screenshot you see here on the right is just another example of different indicators that we might be collecting universally for all students at tier 1. And then across those indicators, are the expected performances that would tell us that a student is either proficient or working on level versus at risk or high risk. And based on the constellation of these different patterns, that could help influence and drive some of our decisions around whether or not to give interventions, and if give interventions, which tier might we start working with. Real quickly, I know we're a little bit short on time, but just if you would, just type in the chat box, is your school system using an early warning system, and how are you currently determining if students are accessing tier 3? What are some of the decision rules that are used, or what are some of the ways in which you're identifying kids for tier 3? So if you would, just take a couple of minutes just to offer some ideas in the chat box for us on that. Are there primarily teacher referrals that are driving your decisions around tier 3? Is it how intense or safety related the behavior concern is that warrants tier 3? Just give me a sense if you don't mind. Thank you, Rebecca. So 4 to 6 weeks of data at tier 2 for academics or behavior, and at least 8 weeks of data, and then see how students are responding is what I'm referring to. And then of course, I'm seeing 2 there. Yeah, if it's a safety related issue, perhaps right away, tier 3. Thank you for that, Ashley. Number of incidences. Okay, great. Thank you. And then Kelly, when there's no improvement after tier 2. Very good. Yeah. So if students are not benefiting from that tier 2 work, assuming of course fidelity is not an issue, then yeah, it makes sense to intensify. 6 to 9 weeks of tier 1 data, Ashley. Thank you. And Anna, thank you. Yeah, you're using the early warning system, looking at those indicators, reviewing quarterly, and then of course a district behavior guide to describe that criteria. That's fantastic. Very good. Thank you so much for sharing that. It's good to see then that yes, you have multiple options available to you, and it's not just a teacher-driven referral process. You know, we want to make sure that our school-based leadership teams are helping to identify these kids. We have criteria to help us find that balance between who really needs this level of intensity versus whether or not we might be better able to serve them at tier 2 or with more differentiated support at tier 1. And David, thank you so much for your comment. After intense progress monitoring by intervention has occurred, we review the student on a case-by-case basis. Yeah, perfect. Excellent. And so as we get into the features of this problem-solving way of work, this idea of database decision-making, we wanted to start out by first acknowledging that in the state of Florida, we do have, in fact, a state-designated 4-step process. Some folks refer to it as sort of the RTI process. This evidence-based way of work has a long history of use in education. And so as we talk about tier 3, we don't want folks to get confused. It's not like we're just completely abandoning one model and completely starting over with a brand new, completely different model at tier 3. As you think about the procedures involved, whether we're talking this 4-step problem-solving model that we talk about often in MTSS versus this FBA BIP process, the functions and the purpose and the procedures involved are basically the same. There might be differences in language and jargon. There might be certain differences in the sequence of items in terms of what comes first. But generally speaking, we want to know, what is the problem? Why is this happening? What will be done to address the reasons why it's happening, the barriers that are resulting in this problem? And then how do we know if our plan is working? And if it's not working enough, what do we do next? Right? How do we avoid those adopt abandon ways of decision making by really taking a pinpoint look at troubleshooting why an intervention might not be very strong or powerful? And so the essential features are here listed on for you. I'm not going to read them point by point, but again, we want to just highlight that there's a strong relationship that we have to manage when conducting this process. So this is why we advocate that on your teams, you have someone who's really well-versed and fluent in how to engage in an FBA BIP process, that they can facilitate the full fidelity and quality of this process. We know from research literature on the use of FBA BIPs that when all of the available valid indicators of effective practice are involved, there is a higher probability and greater efficiency at finding the solutions that in fact work for the student. Now, as we get into conducting our analysis, completing that analysis, and really pinpointing the specific conditions under which this problem behavior is occurring, or whether or not there are certain antecedents that need to be managed, and what those replacement behaviors are that we want to advocate for and provide. Then as you get into the intervention plan, you can see that we use those valid hypotheses, those results from our assessments, to pinpoint what are the specific antecedent strategies. What are those ways that we're going to use to prevent the occurrence of the misbehaviors that we're trying to reduce? At the same time, what are the teaching strategies or reinforcement strategies that we want to use to promote the replacement behaviors we would like to see, the kinds of behaviors that we're looking for at Tier 1? So again, going back to this screenshot from our blueprint on Tier 3 redesign, as you look at how to use this FBA BIP, again, across these different levels of Tier 3 alone, you can see how the intensity of the analysis, the FBA portion, is going to increase. More people are involved to help provide information. The kinds of measures or information we're using could go from mostly indirect methods, right, like interviews and surveys or document reviews, to more intensive levels of analysis, like observations or maybe even full-on functional analysis kinds of methodologies. But we're going to involve more methods, more deep and more in-depth conversation, as well as more complex database or data collection procedures. Now, depending on the level of complexity of your assessment process, that of course then informs and sets the stage for what kinds of strategies are we going to come up with. Very simple, basic, non-complex strategies versus a whole full range of intervention supports that are going to require intense coordination and communication amongst multiple people that are providing those services. So the question that might be coming to you right now is, how do we decide, what level of these 3 levels to provide? We've identified a student who needs Tier 3, either because they've met criteria of not doing well at Tier 2 and we want to intensify, or we've used our early warning system indicators and the student's concerns are certainly intense enough, or the pattern of all their indicator concerns is certainly complex enough that maybe we need to think about something, at Tier 3. But now that we've decided this student represents someone who should be eligible to receive Tier 3, what level of this process at Tier 3 do we start out with? And so this is an emerging topic, just so you know. We're going to share with you in the next couple of slides just some updates and some future resources and tools that we're working on to help guide some of these decisions at your district and school levels. In general, though, what you might consider is that think about the nature and types of the concerns that the student is exhibiting. If we're talking about non-dangerous, non-safety related types of things, talking out, disruptive types of behaviors, refusals to do work, those types of things, it might be worth just focusing on a brief FBA approach. These are kids maybe who only have 1 to 2 very specific behavior concerns. Doesn't really present as a complex case. If you're looking at students, though, that have multiple challenging behaviors that maybe even appear to be interrelated, or whose behaviors are highly intensive or safety related and occur in multiple contexts, then you might consider starting out with a more comprehensive approach, and then from there intensify to a wraparound to include additional services if need be based on their response. Real quickly in the chat, if you wouldn't mind to us, is there currently any guidance available to your schools on how to make this determination of which level of FBA BIP intensity to engage in? Either a quick yes or no, or if you'd like, just anything more specific. We're just curious to see if there's already in the field any current guidance being offered to schools around how to decide which level of FBA to use. Okay. Well, if you do have an answer to that, please go ahead and share that with us, and then I'll let Jason and Betsy know if that comes up. Oh, there we go, Anna. Thank you. MTSS brief FBA BIP. And if the team is considering eligibility, then we go into a more comprehensive. That makes sense. I think when you're going to make high profile and really high impactful decisions like special education eligibility, I think we want to have the most comprehensive view of that student's needs before we look into that eligibility process. I think that's great. So thank you, Anna. And thank you, Ashley. So no, not everyone who has moved into tier 3 gets the FBA. Oops, sorry, I lost the chat there. Decisions around the intensity of support is usually finalized with you, the director of student experience. Okay, great. Yeah, more centralized. Our district team is working on this for the next year. Great. Francine, let us know if we can help. So please reach out to your person assigned to Lee County, and we'll be able to share some more resources with you. And Portia, thank you for your answer as well. Tier 3, teacher-created FBA BIP is generated, and if it's ineffective, then we get into perhaps more comprehensive, more team involvement. Okay. Yeah, thank you. What I'd like to do now is just go ahead and turn it over to Jason. He's going to share with you some tools and resources that you might also consider, as well as some upcoming resources that we're working on. So Jay, over to you.
Thank you. Thanks, Brian. Great job explaining that continuum of tier 3 interventions and supports. We know that it's important to have those systems built to be able to provide those advanced tiers of support. We know that we have that continuum looks like we'll start with a brief, so we may be looking at, just a very simple functional assessment, simple behavior plan. And then, we may have students with very complex behavioral needs. They may be present across multiple settings. We may have multiple behaviors, and they may have a long history of behavioral challenges. And they'll obviously need some more in-depth, more coordinated supports to be able to address some of those behaviors of concern. But as you guys start to look at that continuum of tier 3 and then the linkage between, tier 1, tier 2, and into tier 3, there's several resources that we want to share with you guys. There's been quite a few from the National Center on PBIS. And if you look down at that bottom bullet, it says the tier 3 systems brief. That gets into the systems aspect of what the district may need, the schools may need, and then what sort of systems are necessary for addressing individual student behavior. So that might be a really good 3 different resources that may be really good for you guys to review and share to be able to address that. Another resource that the National Center has provided is on the brief functional behavior assessment. Very nice resource there. It's a fairly quick and easy read, but it provides, provide some information on the teaming aspect of things, and then what resources and training might be necessary to be able to conduct brief functional assessments and develop and give you some good guidance on those behavioral intervention plans. And then from our project, we have a couple that are related to that. And I'll get into on the next slide. I'll share with you. We've created an infographic on FBA BIP Essentials, some of those essential features. So if you look on the left side there, you will see some of those features that Brian spoke to, and those are in the green boxes. Gathering, that information gathering process within that assessment. And then if over on the right side of that document in the blue boxes, those are the essential features that that we recommend being present in your behavior intervention plans. And then over on the left side of the page, we've got a link to that document as well. And then one other thing, we've got a great training. We got a training coming up that will soon be released. So a couple of different formats for that. We'll have an in-person training, and that's going to be good for schools that are going through the tier 2 sequence right now. And this training is going to link directly to the tier 2 systems training, and we just want to expand on that. So to provide that last that tier 3 layer of support, though. So it's going to include training, of course, the face-to-face training, activities built into that, and case studies that will support the brief functional behavior assessment and behavior intervention plan. And it's designed to be completed within about a year that tier 2 systems training. The next option that we'll be developing is a Canvas course, and that might be a good, it's going to really have a lot of the same content. We'll have the, we'll have some training. We'll also have the activities and case studies related to that FBA BIP, but that might be best for schools that have been through tier 2 training, maybe a little bit prior to the, the last year or so. And they may already have good tier 2 systems in place already. And again, both of these trainings are intended to, really expand on the tier 2 systems to do that. So it looks like we're out of time, and just wanted to share that with you. If you have any questions on those trainings that are coming up, please speak to your technical assistance specialist that you work with in your district. So thanks, Brian, for a great chat, and thanks for the great resources and explanation of the tier 3 system.
All right, great. Thank you, Jason, for your help. And so Betsy has provided for you all a TA chat poll. If you wouldn't mind, please take a moment to fill out that poll before you exit. Give us some feedback on what your thoughts were about today's chat. We love this feedback. It helps us to make sure that what we provide in the future is really customized to the unique needs of our schools in Florida. So thank you again, everyone, for being here today and for your engagement in the chat.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Brian and Jason. That was such an amazing chat. Very, very informative. And I love all the new products that you guys have put together. I am putting the chat poll up, and I'll leave it up here for a few minutes so you guys can go ahead and give us some feedback.